Welcome, and thank you for being here. Get comfortable in whatever way your body likes best. Let your shoulders soften, let your jaw unclench, and if your eyes are still open, you can let them close whenever they're ready, as if you're dimming a lamp. Tonight, we're going to drift through a quiet museum of ideas, not the loud, argumentative side of philosophy, but the slow, gentle kind. The kind that asks simple questions and then sits with them, patiently. We'll wander from ancient courtyards to candlelit libraries, from mountain paths to city streets, meeting a few of the most enduring thoughts that human beings have carried with them for thousands of years. And just once, before we begin, if you find these calm explorations comforting, you're welcome to like this video or subscribe to the channel. It helps this little corner of the internet reach other sleepy minds who might need it too. Now, there's nothing you need to memorize, nothing you need to get right. You can simply listen, and if your attention floats away, that's perfect. Philosophy has always made room for wandering minds. We might begin with a man who didn't write books at all, Socrates from ancient Athens. His most famous idea is disarmingly simple. He believed that wisdom begins when you notice what you don't know. It sounds small, almost obvious, until you feel what it does to a person. Instead of rushing to defend every opinion, you can pause, you can become curious, you can ask, what do I really mean by that? And how would I know if I was mistaken? Socrates was known for questions that were calm on the surface, but powerful underneath. He'd ask people what courage is, or justice, or friendship. And as they answered, he'd gently point out the parts that didn't quite fit together, not to embarrass them, but to clear a space for clearer thinking. In everyday life, this kind of humility can be a small kind of peace. You don't have to carry the heavy armor of certainty. You can set it down and rest. From Socrates, we can drift to his student, Plato, who loved images and stories. One of his most famous is the allegory of the cave. Picture a group of people who have lived their whole lives inside a cave. They're facing a wall. Behind them, a fire burns. And between the fire and the people, objects move, casting shadows on the wall. The shadows flicker, stretch, and blur. And the people, having never seen anything else, take those shadows as reality. Then, in Plato's story, someone is freed. They turn around, they see the fire, they see the objects, and eventually they walk out of the cave into daylight, where the world is brighter, more detailed, and more real than they could have imagined. Plato's point isn't just about literal caves. It's about how easily the mind mistakes appearances for truth, how a rumor can feel like knowledge, how a habit can feel like a law of nature, how the first story we hear can become the story we live inside. And yet, the story also carries a gentle hope. If we can turn our heads, even a little, we might see more than we did before, and we don't have to do it all at once. We can adjust slowly, like eyes adapting to light. Now we can step forward to Aristotle, who studied with Plato, but kept his feet a little more firmly on the ground. Aristotle cared about how to live, day by day. One of his central ideas was eudaimonia, often translated as flourishing. Flourishing isn't a burst of happiness. It isn't a lucky day. It's more like a whole life well-being. The feeling that your life is taking its natural shape, like a tree growing toward the sun. For Aristotle, you flourish by practicing virtues, steady qualities like courage, patience, honesty, generosity, not as rigid rules, but as habits you build, one small choice at a time. He also had a calm, practical idea called the golden mean. Many virtues live between extremes. Courage, for example, sits between cowardice and recklessness. Generosity sits between stinginess and wastefulness. The mean isn't a bland middle. It's a wise balance, tuned to the moment. In ordinary life, you can feel this when you choose just enough. Enough effort without burning out. Enough kindness without losing yourself. Enough seriousness without forgetting play. From the Greek world, we can drift into the Roman era, where philosophy often sounded like quiet advice, meant to be used. The Stoics, like Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius, returned again and again to one soothing distinction. Some things are within your control, and many things are not. You can influence your actions, your intentions, your attention, and the meaning you give to events. But you cannot fully control other people, the weather, the economy, the past, or the sudden turns of fate. The Stoic practice is not coldness, it's clarity. It's the gentle relief of sorting reality into two piles, what you can steer and what you cannot, and then putting your energy where it can actually do something. You might imagine this as holding a small lantern. The world beyond the lantern is wide and unpredictable, but within that soft circle of light, you can still choose your next step. Marcus Aurelius, an emperor who wrote private notes to himself, often reminded his own mind to return to the present, to respond with steadiness, to be, as he put it in spirit, a good person, not a perfect one. And alongside the Stoics, there was Epicurus, whose name is sometimes misunderstood. Epicurus didn't teach endless indulgence. His idea of pleasure was quieter, more like contentment. He believed that many of our anxieties come from wanting too much, or wanting the wrong kinds of things. Status, endless possessions, approval that can vanish overnight. Epicurus suggested a simpler set of pleasures: friendship, modest food, a safe place to sleep, a mind that isn't constantly trembling with fear. He even described philosophy as a kind of medicine for the soul, not a performance of cleverness, but a way to ease unnecessary pain. And now, very gently, we can widen our path beyond the Mediterranean, toward ideas that grew in India and East Asia, often with the same calm aim: to see clearly and to suffer less. In Buddhist thought, one of the most central ideas is impermanence. Everything changes. Feelings rise and fall. Thoughts appear and dissolve. Bodies age. Seasons turn. Even the things we call stable are, up close, moving. At first, impermanence can sound unsettling, but it can also be a lullaby, because if everything is changing, then difficult moments change too. Pain is not a permanent homeland, it is weather. Buddhist practice often trains attention to notice this flow directly. You watch the breath come and go. You notice a thought arrive and leave. And over time, the mind learns that it doesn't have to cling so tightly. Alongside impermanence is compassion, not as a sentimental feeling, but as a steady orientation. The recognition that other beings, like you, want ease and safety, that they too feel fear, that they too get tired. Compassion, in this view, isn't weakness, it's realism. It's seeing the shared condition and softening around it. From China, we can step into the gentle order of Confucius, who cared deeply about harmony in human life. Confucian thought often focuses on relationships: parent and child, friend and friend, citizen and community. Confucius suggested that a good society isn't built only by laws, but by character, ritual, and small acts of respect. Not empty politeness, but an attention that says, you matter, you are part of this. In everyday life, it can be as simple as speaking with care, keeping promises, showing gratitude, doing the small duties that stitch a world together. And then there is Taoism, often associated with Laozi and the idea of the Tao, or the way. Taoist thought can feel like water, soft, patient, and strong without forcing. One of its most soothing ideas is Wu Wei, sometimes described as effortless action or non-forcing. It doesn't mean doing nothing. It means not wrestling reality into shapes it doesn't want to take. It's the difference between pushing a river uphill and learning how to float with the current, steering gently when you can. You might recognize this in moments when you stop trying to control every detail and instead do the next small thing with a calm hand. And with that, we can let our minds continue drifting from these early wisdoms toward the long, candlelit centuries that follow, carrying the same quiet questions. What is real? What is good? How should we live? And how can a mind find rest? In the medieval world, philosophy often walked side by side with theology, not always as an argument, but as an attempt to understand the shape of a life, the weight of time, and the quiet pull of the inner self. Augustine, writing in late antiquity, turned his attention inward with an unusual tenderness. One of his lasting insights is that the mind isn't a simple, transparent thing. We can be strangers to ourselves, and yet we can also learn to listen to ourselves more carefully. He noticed how memory holds whole worlds. You can be lying still in the dark, and suddenly you're 10 years old again, smelling a place, hearing a voice, feeling something you didn't know you still carried. For Augustine, this inner landscape mattered. It wasn't just private noise. It was part of what it meant to be human. And in a softer way, he also reminded people that rest isn't only physical. There is a kind of rest the mind looks for, a feeling of being settled, no longer chasing, no longer grasping. Even if you don't share Augustine's religious commitments, the psychological note is still there, that deep human longing to stop running. A little later, Thomas Aquinas tried to bring a kind of patient structure to big questions. Aquinas had a quiet confidence that reason and experience are not enemies. He treated the world as something intelligible, something that can be understood step by step. One gentle idea you can take from this is simply the permission to think slowly. Not everything has to be solved in a rush. Some questions deserve careful looking, like turning an object in your hands to see it from many angles. Then, as we move into the early modern period, the mood changes. Europe is filling with new science, new instruments, new maps of the heavens, and philosophy begins to ask, with fresh intensity, what counts as knowledge. René Descartes begins with doubt, not as gloom, but as a tool. He imagined stripping away every belief that might be uncertain, like clearing a desk until only the most solid thing remains. He noticed that many things can be doubted. Senses can mislead. Dreams can feel real. Even long-held assumptions can wobble under pressure. But, Descartes said, there is something you can't doubt while you're doubting. The fact that you are thinking. That's the heartbeat behind his famous line, often paraphrased as, I think, therefore I am. In a sleepy room, this can feel almost comforting. Even if everything else is unclear, there is this small certainty, the presence of awareness itself. Thoughts drifting by, the mind still here, quietly witnessing. From Descartes, we can drift toward Baruch Spinoza, whose philosophy has a wide, calm horizon. Spinoza imagined nature as one vast, connected reality, where everything belongs. Everything has causes. Everything follows from the same underlying order. He suggested that many of our painful emotions come from confusion about causes. We get angry, ashamed, jealous, afraid, and we feel tossed around by forces we can't name. But as we understand more, the mind becomes less stormy. For Spinoza, understanding isn't just information, it's a kind of freedom. When you see how things fit together, you don't have to take every feeling as a command. You can notice it, place it in context, and let it soften. And he also offered a quietly beautiful idea about perspective. When you look at your life only from the close-up view, the struggles can feel enormous. But if you widen the frame, if you see yourself as part of nature's larger flow, something can unclench, not because your problems don't matter, but because they are not the whole sky. Now, we can move toward thinkers who focused on the mind's relationship with experience. John Locke, for example, suggested that the mind begins not as a library of built-in ideas, but as something more open, shaped by what it meets. You can picture the mind as a room that gradually fills with furniture. Sensations arrive first: colors, sounds, warmth, pressure. Then, the mind begins to combine them into more complex thoughts, like building with blocks. This viewpoint invites a gentle curiosity about how you became you. How much of your character is habit? How much is environment? How many of your obvious beliefs are simply things you absorbed early, before you knew you were absorbing them? David Hume then steps in with an even sharper but strangely calming observation. He noticed that what we call the self is hard to find as a single thing. When you look closely, you find sensations, feelings, thoughts, one after another. A stream, not a stone. Hume didn't say you don't exist. He said that the mind is more like a bundle of experiences, constantly changing, and the sense of a stable me may be something the mind constructs, a helpful story that creates continuity. In everyday terms, this can be relieving. You are not one fixed object. You are a living process. If you can change from 1 hour to the next, you can also change from 1 year to the next. You can learn. You can heal. You can become gentler with yourself. Now, the Enlightenment brings us to Immanuel Kant, who asked how morality can be grounded. Kant worried about doing the right thing only when it happens to feel pleasant, or only when it brings rewards. He wanted something steadier. One of Kant's best-known ideas is the thought that people should be treated as ends in themselves, not merely as tools for someone else's purposes. It's a simple sentence, but it carries weight. It's an invitation to look at another person and remember there is a whole world inside them, not a character in your story, but a full human being with their own fears and hopes and private nights. Kant also believed that duty, when understood well, isn't just a burden. It can be a form of dignity, a way of saying, I will do what is right, even when no one is watching. And there is something quietly restful in that, a moral steadiness that doesn't depend on applause. Around the same era, Jean-Jacques Rousseau was thinking about society and how it shapes us. Rousseau had a sensitivity to how often we start performing, living for comparison, reputation, and approval. He noticed that a person can become divided, There is the self you are, and the self you feel pressured to present. And between them, tension grows. Whether or not you agree with all of Rousseau's conclusions, the insight is still gentle and modern. A quieter life often begins when you stop living primarily in other people's eyes, when you return, little by little, to what feels true in you. Then comes John Stuart Mill, who brought a careful voice to questions of freedom and happiness. Mill argued that liberty matters, not just as a political idea, but as a condition for human growth. People need room to explore, to make mistakes, to develop their own shape. Mill also offered a thoughtful distinction about pleasure. Not all pleasures are equal. Some pleasures are shallow and quickly exhausted. Others are richer, the kind that expand a mind or deepen a heart. A good conversation, a piece of music that changes you, a moment of understanding. And in that, Mill gives a gentle reminder that a peaceful life isn't necessarily an empty one. It can be quietly full, filled with the kinds of experiences that leave you more alive, but not more agitated. As philosophy moves into the 19th century, the questions become more restless again. Friedrich Nietzsche, often misunderstood as simply dark, was also intensely concerned with honesty and vitality. He challenged people to examine inherited values, to ask whether they truly serve life, or whether they quietly shrink it. Handled calmly, Nietzsche can sound like this. Don't sleepwalk through the moral habits you are handed. Look at them, test them, see whether they make you more courageous, more generous, more awake, or whether they make you bitter and small. Nietzsche also wrote about the danger of resentment, the way a person can become trapped in a constant inner complaint. Not as a scolding, but as a warning. If you live too long in resentment, it can become a room with no windows. And if you imagine opening a window, just a crack, you can feel the shape of Nietzsche's hope. Not a loud optimism, but a push toward a more spacious inner life. At the edge of this period, Søren Kierkegaard turns toward the inner experience of choice. Kierkegaard cared about what it feels like to be a person standing at a crossroads, knowing that you must choose and that you cannot see the whole future. He wrote about anxiety, but not as doom, more like the dizziness of freedom. When many paths are possible, the mind can spin, and yet, that possibility is also what makes a life meaningful. You are not a machine, you are a chooser. Kierkegaard's calm gift is the reminder that you can take one step at a time. You don't have to hold your entire life in your hands all at once. You can choose the next honest action and let the rest unfold later, in its own time. And as you listen now, with your body growing heavier and your breathing softer, you can let these ideas be like lanterns along a path. You don't need to carry them all. You can simply pass by them, letting one or two glow for a moment, and then fade gently behind you. As we move into the 20th century, philosophy begins to sound less like a set of finished conclusions, and more like a careful description of what it feels like to be alive. Phenomenology, for example, is a tradition that asks us to notice experience from the inside. Instead of arguing about the world in the abstract, it says, start with what shows up in awareness. How does a thing appear to you? How does time feel, moment to moment? How do you experience another person, not as an object, but as a presence? Edmund Husserl, often named as a founder of phenomenology, suggested that we can practice a kind of gentle bracketing. You set aside, for a moment, the usual assumptions, and simply look at the experience itself. It's a little like holding a cup of tea and noticing its warmth, its weight, the faint scent rising, before your mind rushes to labels and stories. Not because labels are bad, but because direct attention can be quietly clarifying, and already you can feel how this fits a sleepy mind. If you're lying in bed, you might notice the softness of the pillow, the rhythm of breath, the sense of space around you. Experience just as it is, simple, present, and enough. Martin Heidegger, who emerged from this tradition, wrote about something even more everyday. He said that humans are not detached spectators. We are always already in the world. We don't float above life like cameras. We are involved, concerned, shaped by our projects and relationships. Heidegger also had a quiet way of describing how we usually live. Much of the time, we move with the crowd. We do what one does. We adopt opinions, schedules, and worries that feel normal, but may not be deeply chosen. He didn't say this to shame anyone. He pointed it out because noticing it creates a possibility. You can live a little more deliberately. You can decide what matters to you, not only what is customary. And in a calm tone, this becomes a very gentle invitation. What in your life is truly yours? What feels like borrowed noise? What might you lay down, just for tonight? From here, we can drift into existentialism, which often sounds dramatic, but can be held softly. Existentialist thinkers asked what it means to be free and what it costs to avoid that freedom. Jean-Paul Sartre, for instance, said that we are condemned to be free, meaning that we can't escape choice. Even not choosing is a kind of choice. Even drifting is a direction. If that sounds heavy, you can soften it. Sartre's point can also be liberating. You are not merely a product of circumstance. You have agency, even in small ways. You can choose how to interpret, how to respond, how to live the next hour. Sartre also described something he called bad faith. It's when we pretend we have no freedom, because freedom feels frightening. We say, I have to be this way, when really we are avoiding the discomfort of change. But again, this doesn't need to be a harsh accusation. It can be a kindly mirror. If you notice even one place where you've been shrinking yourself, you can loosen it gently and let yourself breathe again. Simone de Beauvoir, closely connected to existentialism, explored freedom in a more relational and grounded way. She emphasized that human beings become themselves over time. We aren't finished objects. We are projects, unfolding through choices, constraints, and relationships. De Beauvoir also insisted that freedom isn't only personal. It's shaped by the world around us. Some people are given wide open fields. Others face fences and locked gates. And ethical life, for her, includes noticing those differences and caring about them. Held softly, this becomes a reminder that your freedom and another person's freedom are connected. When we help each other become more fully human, something in the world relaxes. The air clears a little. Now, there is another thinker whose calm presence is often felt even through difficult times. Hannah Arendt. Arendt cared deeply about the act of thinking itself, not thinking as showing off intelligence, but thinking as a quiet moral practice. One of Arendt's most memorable ideas is that thoughtlessness can be dangerous, not because people are evil in an obvious way, but because they stop examining what they are doing. They stop asking, what is this really? And what might it lead to? So, for Arendt, Thinking is like keeping a light on, a small inner conversation that refuses to go completely dark. In your own life, this can be gentle and practical. Before a sharp word, you pause. Before a cruel assumption, you check it. Before a habit that numbs you, you ask what it's doing to you. Thinking becomes a kind of care. And Arendt also wrote beautifully about beginnings. Human beings can start again. Each day, each conversation, each decision can be a small new beginning. That possibility is always present, even when you feel tired. Now, to soften the pace, we can step sideways into a more quiet, practical tradition: pragmatism. Pragmatist thinkers, like William James and John Dewey, asked a different question. Not only is this idea true in some abstract sense, but what happens when you live by it? William James, in particular, was interested in the texture of consciousness. He described the stream of thought, the way the mind flows, never quite holding still. You can't step into the same mental moment twice. It's always moving on. James also recognized that beliefs are not just cold statements. They are living things that shape your attention and your actions. And sometimes, he suggested, you can't wait for perfect certainty before you commit. Some choices must be made in the fog, and only then does the path become clear. That can be comforting. If you've ever felt stuck because you want a guarantee, philosophy quietly says, many people have felt that too. And still, life moves forward, one step at a time. John Dewey, another pragmatist, saw thinking as a tool for living. For Dewey, education and reflection weren't about collecting facts. They were about learning how to navigate experience, how to solve problems, how to cooperate, how to grow. You might imagine Dewey's philosophy as a workshop, not a courtroom. Less about winning arguments, more about building a life that works, a society that learns, a mind that stays flexible. And staying flexible is, in its own way, restful. Rigidity is exhausting. Flexibility lets you adapt, like a branch moving with wind instead of snapping. Now, with the mind growing quieter, we can return to the theme that has been present all along: the relationship between inner life and outer world, and the gentle art of paying attention. Across these traditions, you can notice a shared thread. Socrates invites humility. Plato invites a turning toward deeper reality. Aristotle invites balanced habits. Stoicism invites focus on what you can control. Buddhism invites non-clinging. Confucius invites harmony. Taoism invites non-forcing. Descartes invites careful doubt. Spinoza invites understanding. Kant invites respect. Existentialism invites honest choice. Arendt invites thinking. It's like a long shoreline with different stones under your feet, but the same sea nearby, breathing in and out. And as you rest here, you don't need to hold the whole history of philosophy in your mind. You can let it become something simpler, a slow companionship, a reminder that human beings have been asking these questions for a very long time, and that you are not alone in your wondering. So, let your breathing settle again, in and out. And as thoughts continue to arise, as they always do, you can treat them the way these philosophers often did, with a little space and a little kindness. A thought can appear, and you don't have to follow it. A feeling can rise, and you don't have to solve it right now. You can simply notice and let it pass, like a leaf on water. And if you drift off somewhere along this path, that's not a failure. That's the point. A mind that rests is still a mind. A quiet mind is still alive. So we'll continue. gently, letting the next ideas arrive like soft footsteps in the dark. There is a simple question that keeps returning, in different centuries, wearing different clothes. What is a mind, really? When you say I, what are you pointing to? Some philosophers have treated the mind as a kind of inner theatre, thoughts, images, feelings, appearing on a private stage. Others have treated it as something more like a process, an activity, a pattern that happens when a living brain meets a living world. And even without technical terms, you can feel the mystery. You can be very close to your own experience and still not quite grasp it, like trying to look directly at your own eyes without a mirror. One gentle idea comes from the philosopher Gilbert Ryle, who warned against thinking of the mind as a ghost living inside a machine. He suggested that sometimes we make mistakes just by using certain pictures. If we imagine the mind as a hidden little person inside the head, pulling levers, we can end up confused. Instead, Ryle encouraged thinking of mental life as something expressed in patterns of behavior, attention, and responsiveness, not to reduce human depth, but to remove unnecessary puzzles. In everyday life, this can feel like a small easing. You don't have to imagine a separate, secret operator inside you. You are the living whole, the person breathing, sensing, responding, learning. And then, in a different mood, there is Ludwig Wittgenstein, who was fascinated by language. Wittgenstein noticed that many philosophical problems don't begin with reality. They begin with the way words tangle. We take a word like meaning, or mind, or time, and we expect it to behave like a solid object. We grip it too tightly. We demand a single, crisp definition that fits every case, and when it doesn't fit, we feel lost. Wittgenstein suggested something calmer. Look at how words are actually used. Meaning, he said in spirit, is often in the living practice, the language games we play in daily life. The word game itself is a good example. Chess, football, hide and seek, solitaire. They don't all share one strict essence. They overlap in family resemblances, and yet we use the word perfectly well. So sometimes the way out of confusion is not a new theory, but a soft untangling, a reminder that words are tools, not cages. And in the quiet of night, this can be soothing. You don't need to force every thought into a tight definition. You can let meaning be a little breathable, a little human. Another question drifts in beside the mind and language. What is time? Not time on clocks, but time as you feel it. A minute can stretch when you're anxious. An hour can disappear when you're absorbed. A whole year can feel like a blur when you look back. Henri Bergson, a philosopher of time and consciousness, distinguished between measured time and lived duration. He suggested that the inner sense of time is not made of separate beads, like seconds on a string. It's more like a melody, where each note carries traces of the ones before it. Your present is never perfectly isolated. It has a gentle thickness, a little memory, a little anticipation, a soft blending. If you've ever noticed that you can't quite locate the boundary between now and just now, you felt something like what Bergson meant. And in bed, this is especially clear. The night doesn't arrive as a sharp switch. It seeps in, thoughts slow, the body's sense of time changes. Minutes become softer around the edges. Now, we can float toward another steady set of questions. How do we know what we know? One calm answer comes from the idea of fallibilism. The thought that human knowledge is real and useful and often reliable, but never perfect. We can be confident without being rigid. We can act on our best understanding while staying open to revision. This is the mood of much good science, and also much good philosophy. Not certainty carved in stone, but careful belief, held with humility, and you can feel the emotional benefit of that. If you demand perfect certainty, the mind never rests. It keeps checking, rechecking, running in circles. But if you accept that knowledge can be good enough and still improvable, a quiet steadiness appears. You can choose and then breathe. From knowledge, it's a gentle step to ethics, to the question of how to live with other people. Earlier, we touched on Kant's idea of respecting persons as ends in themselves. There's another ethical perspective that offers a different kind of calm, virtue ethics, which echoes Aristotle. Instead of obsessing over single isolated actions, it asks, what kind of person are you becoming? A single choice matters, yes, but so does the pattern, the shape of your habits, the tone you return to when you're tired, the way you speak when you're irritated, the way you repair when you've made a mistake. This view can be comforting because it is patient. You don't have to be perfect today. You have to practice, like learning an instrument. You miss notes, you try again, you slowly improve. Then there is the ethics of care, a modern approach that emphasizes relationships, responsibility, and the practical work of caring for real people. It suggests that moral life is not only about abstract rules, but about attention, noticing what someone needs, noticing your own limits, and responding with steadiness. Care ethics feels close to the texture of ordinary life, the small kindnesses, the quiet duties, the gentle thought, "Are you okay?" The decision to listen, the willingness to show up. And even if you're alone in your room right now, you are still part of a web of care. Someone once cared for you in some way, and you have likely cared for others. The world is partly held together by these invisible threads. Now, to shift the mood into something softer still, we can wander toward beauty. Philosophers have often asked, why does beauty matter? It's easy to treat beauty as decoration, as something extra. But many thinkers have noticed that beauty can calm the mind, widen perception, and remind us of value beyond utility. When you hear a piece of music that feels right, something in you aligns. When you see a landscape that makes you pause, you become quieter. When you watch light move across a wall, you feel, for a moment, that being alive is enough. Immanuel Kant, in his writing on aesthetic judgment, suggested that beauty gives a kind of free play to the mind. You're not trying to use the object. You're not trying to extract something from it. You're simply attending, enjoying the experience of harmony. And that, too, can be a practice. A way of living that doesn't always demand a payoff. A way of looking that is gentle, unhurried. Another philosopher, Iris Murdoch, spoke about attention in a way that feels both ethical and aesthetic. She suggested that the moral work of a human being is often the work of seeing others more clearly, seeing ourselves less selfishly, turning our attention outward with kindness. For Murdoch, love is not only a feeling, it is a discipline of perception, a patient movement away from the little noisy self, toward reality as it truly is. And that movement can be quiet, almost invisible. You don't have to announce it, you simply practice noticing, and in noticing, you soften. Now, as we continue to drift, you might notice that your own mind is doing what minds do, it's making pictures, connecting ideas, remembering, wandering. If a thought arrives that feels sharp or urgent, you can treat it like a philosophical question, but not tonight. Tonight, you can set it gently on a shelf. It will still be there tomorrow if it needs to be. For now, you can return to something simple, the feeling of the bed beneath you, the slow rise and fall of breathing, the way the night holds you without asking anything. And somewhere in the background, like distant footsteps in a hallway, these old ideas continue to move, calm, steady, patient, keeping you company as you drift further into rest. There's another quiet thread that runs through philosophy, almost like a soft pencil line under the page. The idea that clarity can be a kind of kindness. When you're confused, the mind works harder. It tightens, it replays, it circles. But when something becomes clear, even a little, the body often relaxes with it. That's why philosophers have often cared about logic, not as a cold game, but as a way of keeping thoughts from turning into knots. Aristotle, long ago, helped shape formal logic, ways of noticing when an argument truly follows. If all humans are mortal, and Socrates is human, then Socrates is mortal, simple, clean, unavoidable. And the comforting part isn't the conclusion, it's the feeling of soundness, the sense that the mind can walk on firm ground for a moment. Much later, philosophers discovered that even logic has surprising edges, gentle paradoxes that remind us to be humble. One famous example is the heap problem. If you have a heap of sand and you remove one grain, it's still a heap. Remove another, still a heap. But if you keep going long enough, eventually you have no heap at all. So where, exactly, did the heap disappear? The point is not to make you dizzy. It's to show how many of our words are fuzzy at the boundaries. Heap, tall, bald, rich, old. They work well in daily life, but they don't always have sharp edges. And that's okay. A gentle mind can accept that many things are precise enough to use, without being perfectly defined. Now, let's return to questions that feel closer to the heart. What makes a life meaningful? Some thinkers have tried to answer with grand systems. Others have offered something quieter. Meaning is not always found. Sometimes it is made, built from attention, love, work, and care. The philosopher Viktor Frankl, writing from the shadow of immense suffering, suggested that meaning can be discovered even in difficult conditions, through how we relate to what happens, through what we choose to stand for, through what we give to others. Even if you never read Frankl's work directly, the idea can land softly. You don't always control what happens, but you can often choose your stance. You can choose what you refuse to become. You can choose, in small ways, the kind of person you will be. And meaning doesn't have to be dramatic. It can be very small. A small act of patience, a small loyalty, a small creation, a small moment of beauty noticed and received. Another gentle view comes from the ancient Stoics again, who often spoke as if life is a role in a larger play. You didn't choose the entire script. You didn't choose the weather. You didn't choose the length of the scene. But you can choose how to play your part. With dignity, with steadiness, with care. This idea can soften the mind at night. You don't have to carry everything. You only have to live the moment you're in, as well as you can, and then let it go. Now, one of the most tender areas of philosophy is how it handles suffering, not by denying it, and not by turning it into melodrama, but by asking what suffering is, and what might loosen its grip. In Buddhist thought, a central observation is that suffering often comes from clinging. We cling to things staying the same. We cling to being admired. We cling to being right. We cling to an image of how life should go. And because life changes, and other people are unpredictable, and the world does not follow our private scripts, clinging becomes pain. The alternative isn't indifference. It's softness. It's learning to hold experience lightly, to appreciate what is here without demanding that it never leave. A practical image is the open hand. When your hand is clenched, it aches. When it's open, it can receive and release. And compassion returns here too. When you notice that others cling and suffer as well, you may feel less isolated. You may feel less angry. You may feel, instead, a quiet solidarity. From the East again, there is also a gentle philosophical puzzle about the self. In many Hindu traditions, there is a concept of Atman, a deeper self, sometimes described as not quite the same as the changing personality, but something more enduring, more subtle. Different schools disagree about how to interpret this. Some speak of a stable inner witness. Others speak of the self as ultimately one with a larger reality. You don't need to decide tonight which view is right. You can simply notice the shared human intuition behind them, that there is something in experience that feels deeper than passing moods. And perhaps, in bed, you can sense it as the quiet watcher behind thoughts, the part of you that notices, the part of you that can rest, even while thoughts come and go. Now, philosophy also has a gentle way of helping us with fear, especially the fear of uncertainty. In ancient Greece, a school called skepticism suggested that peace can come from suspending judgment when evidence is unclear, not as laziness, but as a deliberate practice. Instead of forcing a conclusion, you can say, "I don't know." And strangely, the mind can relax. It doesn't have to pretend. It doesn't have to strain. This is related to a modern idea you might feel in yourself: the difference between uncertainty and danger. Uncertainty is simply not knowing. Danger is a threat. But the mind often treats uncertainty as danger, and that creates unnecessary alarm. So, a quiet practice is to notice uncertainty, and then tell your nervous system, gently, "This is not an emergency. This is just not knowing." And the body sometimes listens. Now, to bring us back to the world of other people, we can touch on one more calm ethical idea: forgiveness. Not as pretending harm didn't happen, and not as excusing everything, but as a way of not letting bitterness become a permanent tenant in the mind. Some philosophers and spiritual traditions treat forgiveness as a kind of liberation. You don't do it because the other person deserves it. You do it because you deserve peace. That peace might begin simply by loosening the grip, by letting the mind stop rehearsing, by choosing, in small ways, not to feed the same old fire. And that choice can be slow. It can be imperfect. It can be private. Even the decision to rest tonight is a kind of mercy toward yourself. Now, as your breathing continues to deepen, we can let the ideas become even softer, like distant lanterns seen through mist. Consider the thought that you do not have to solve your whole life. You don't have to settle every question about meaning, self, truth, love, time, and goodness. Human beings have been thinking about these things for thousands of years. And still, the questions remain open in many ways. That's not a failure. That's the shape of being human. So, you can give yourself permission to be unfinished, to be learning, to be a work in progress, and you can let that be gentle, not pressured, like a garden that grows by its own pace with quiet seasons. If a question comes to mind, you can let it drift through like a cloud. What matters most to me, really? What do I want to cultivate? What can I let go of? And then, you don't have to answer. You can simply rest with the questions, the way philosophers often did, as if the questions themselves are companions, not demands. Breathing in and out, a little softer each time. And as the night holds you, you can feel the mind becoming less interested in control, and more interested in easing, less interested in winning, and more interested in understanding, less interested in rushing, and more interested in simply being here, safely, now. And we will keep drifting slowly through these calm rooms of thought, letting each idea arrive, glow gently, and fade as you sink further into sleep. If you're still listening, you might notice that philosophy has a strange talent. It can make the world feel both larger and quieter. Larger, because you sense how many ways there are to see life. Quieter, because you realize you don't have to cling to only one way all the time. So now we can let the next ideas be even more gentle, like soft footsteps on carpet. One question that returns again and again is, what is happiness? Not a spark of excitement, but a steady ease. The ancient Greeks often treated happiness as something shaped by character and practice. The Stoics treated it as a kind of inner freedom. Epicurus treated it as contentment and friendship. Buddhist traditions treated it as a reduction of clinging and an increase of compassion. And modern thinkers have added their own notes, sometimes emphasizing meaning, connection, and the ability to live with uncertainty. If you hold all of these together, you get a calm picture. Happiness is not one thing. It's a family of quiet goods, a life with less unnecessary suffering, a mind with fewer storms, a heart with more warmth, a path with enough purpose to feel real. Now, another gentle topic is the nature of desire. Desire can motivate, inspire, create, but it can also exhaust. It can make the mind lean forward all the time, never quite arriving. Some philosophical traditions ask you to notice what desire is doing to you. Does it expand your life, or shrink it? Does it connect you, or isolate you? Does it lead to gratitude, or to endless comparison? This kind of noticing is not about judging yourself. It's about learning, like watching a tide come in and go out. You don't need to fight the tide. You just need to understand it. And there is a soft relief in realizing that you don't have to obey every desire. You can let some desires pass through like wind and choose which ones deserve your energy. Now, there is another theme that can be deeply soothing at night: the relationship between thought and reality. It's easy to believe that thoughts are facts, but many philosophers, and many modern psychologists too, would agree on this gentle point. A thought is an event in the mind, not necessarily a report of truth. A thought can be loud and still be wrong. A thought can be frightening and still be only a possibility. A thought can be repetitive and still not deserve your attention. In a way, this is the practical side of skepticism and mindfulness combined. You can listen to thoughts without letting them drive. You can imagine thoughts as birds calling in the dark. Some calls matter. Many are just calls. And the simple act of noticing, this is just a thought, can loosen the mind's grip. Now, philosophy also explores how we relate to others. And one calm idea here is the concept of recognition. To be recognized is not just to be seen with eyes, but to be seen with understanding, to feel that another person grasps something true about you, your effort, your pain, your hope. Many social philosophers have argued that recognition is a human need. Without it, people feel invisible. With it, people feel grounded, and you can practice recognition quietly, even in your own inner life. You can recognize yourself, not as a harsh judge, but as a witness. You can say gently, yes, this has been hard, or yes, I've been trying, or even, yes, I'm tired. And in that recognition, something softens. Now, we can glide to a different kind of question, about knowledge and trust. How much of what you know did you learn alone? Almost none. Human knowledge is social. You learn language from others. You learn history from others. You learn how to cook, how to drive, how to behave from others. Even your most private thoughts use shared words. This is the wisdom behind a quiet idea. We are interdependent, not only practically, but intellectually, and that can be comforting. You don't have to carry the whole burden of knowing. You can rely carefully on the work of others. At the same time, philosophy invites you to refine your trust, to ask, is this source reliable? Is this belief well supported? Am I repeating something just because it's familiar? This is not meant to make you anxious. It's meant to make you freer. A mind that can check its beliefs gently is a mind that is less easily pulled by noise. Now, let's return to a very old philosophical practice, contemplation. Contemplation is not frantic thinking. It's a quiet looking, a resting attention on something real. In some traditions, contemplation is directed toward nature. In others, toward the self. In others, toward moral truths, or beauty, or the divine. But the feeling is similar. The mind becomes less busy, more settled, more spacious. You might try a small version of contemplation now. Notice your breath, not to control it, but to accompany it. Notice the air on your skin. Notice the weight of your body being held. This is not an escape from philosophy. It is philosophy in its most gentle form, attention to what is. Now, there is a modern philosophical idea that fits beautifully with sleep. The idea that consciousness is not a single spotlight. It's more like a shifting field. Sometimes attention is sharp. Sometimes it is wide. Sometimes it is dim. And sleep is not a sudden drop off a cliff. It is a gradual change in the field. Thoughts become dreamlike. Images become looser. The sense of me becomes softer. Philosophers of mind have long been fascinated by this transition because it shows something important. Your waking self is not the only mode of being. The mind has seasons. And when you remember that, you may feel less pressured to stay on all the time. You are allowed to power down. You are allowed to drift. You are allowed to disappear into rest for a while and return later. Now, another calm insight comes from a tradition sometimes called existential psychotherapy, influenced by philosophers like Kierkegaard and others. It suggests that some human anxieties are universal, and they don't always need to be fixed. They need to be understood. The anxiety of freedom, the anxiety of uncertainty, the anxiety of isolation, the anxiety of mortality. These are big words, but they don't have to feel heavy right now. You can hold them lightly, like stones warmed by the sun. The soothing part is this. If you sometimes feel these anxieties, you are not broken. You are human. And often, the mind becomes calmer when it stops treating its own feelings as emergencies. So tonight, you can let yourself be a human animal, resting, a creature that breathes, a creature that thinks, a creature that sometimes worries, and still a creature that can sleep. Now, the ideas can fade even further into the background. Like a museum at closing time, lights dimming room by room, you've walked past enough exhibits for tonight. You've gathered enough gentle companions, and now the mind can do what it was designed to do. When the world is quiet and the body is safe, it can let go, it can drift, it can rest. So take a slow breath in and let it out. And if your attention is still with my voice, you can let it soften. You don't have to follow every sentence. You can let words become sound, sound become rhythm, rhythm become quiet, and will continue very gently as you move deeper towards sleep. There is a small, quiet miracle that philosophers return to again and again. You can change your mind, not just in the shallow way of switching an opinion, but in the deeper way of seeing something differently and becoming a little different because of it. This is one reason philosophy has always felt like more than a school subject. It's a practice of revision, a slow reshaping of attention, a gradual refining of what you think matters, and you can do it gently, without drama. One tradition that speaks to this is the idea of the examined life. The phrase is often linked to Socrates, who suggested that a life without examination is, in some sense, diminished. Not because it's immoral, but because it's half asleep. Examination doesn't mean endless self-criticism. It means noticing patterns. Why do I react the way I do? What do I fear losing? What do I chase, even when it doesn't satisfy? What do I keep avoiding? Sometimes you don't even need an answer. The act of asking is enough to create space, and space is where calm begins. Now, there's another gentle theme that can be soothing at night. The idea that your identity is partly a story. Many modern philosophers and psychologists have noticed that we understand ourselves through narrative. You remember certain moments, you connect them, you build a sense of, this is who I am. But the story is not the whole truth. It's a selection, a particular camera angle. You can imagine your life as a huge library, filled with scenes and moods and details, and your daily self is the small stack of books you happen to be carrying right now. This means you can sometimes loosen the grip of a harsh identity. If your mind says, I'm always like this, you can answer softly, that's one story. If it says, I ruined everything, you can answer, that's one chapter, not the whole book. And that doesn't erase responsibility. It simply restores proportion. A related idea comes from ancient practices of self-cultivation. The Stoics, for example, were fond of journaling, reflection, and mental rehearsal, not to control life, but to prepare the mind. They would ask themselves, quietly, if something goes wrong tomorrow, how will I respond? Not as a fearful prediction, but as a way to strengthen steadiness. They also practiced negative visualization, which sounds darker than it is. The aim was gratitude. You imagine, briefly, life without something you take for granted. And then you feel the tenderness of having it, the warm cup, the friend, the roof, the ordinary day. In small doses, this can soften the constant hunger for more. It can return you to enough. Now, another philosophical thread that fits with sleep is the idea of acceptance. Acceptance isn't surrender, it's accurate contact with reality. It's the moment you stop saying, internally, this shouldn't be happening, when it already is happening. That inner argument is exhausting. Acceptance ends the argument. This appears in Stoicism, in Buddhism, in Taoism, and in many modern therapeutic traditions that borrow their wisdom. You can accept that you feel tired. You can accept that you feel uncertain. You can accept that a worry exists without feeding it. And then you can choose what to do next, which tonight might simply be rest. Now, in the 20th century, one philosopher who spoke in a very human voice was Albert Camus. Camus is often associated with the idea of the absurd, the mismatch between our desire for meaning and the world's silence. That can sound bleak, but Camus offered something surprisingly bright. He suggested that when you face the absurd honestly, you can become freer. You stop demanding that the universe provide a tidy answer, and you begin to create meaning through the way you live. Camus imagined Sisyphus endlessly rolling a stone up a hill, and asked us to picture him not as crushed, but as awake, as someone who, knowing the truth of his condition, still chooses his stance, still chooses his attitude, still claims his dignity. Held softly, the lesson is this: you may not control the whole shape of life, but you can still choose the quality of your presence within it. And choosing presence can be very gentle. It can be as simple as noticing a small beauty, offering a small kindness, doing a small task with care. Now, another calm idea comes from philosophers who studied how we form beliefs and make decisions. They noticed that the mind often prefers simple, comforting stories, even when reality is messy. We like clear villains, clear heroes, clear explanations. But life is often layered, people are mixed, causes are tangled. So, a wise mind learns to tolerate complexity without turning it into anxiety. This is a kind of emotional maturity, to hold two truths at once, to say, this person hurt me and they are also human, to say, I made a mistake and I can still learn, to say, I don't know yet and I can be okay. And when you practice that, your inner life becomes less brittle, less reactive, more spacious. Now, let's bring the focus back to a very intimate question. What is the good life for you? Philosophers have offered many answers, but one gentle thread runs through many traditions. The good life involves alignment. Your values and your actions fit together. Your days reflect what you say matters. You don't have to perform a different self for every room you enter. Alignment doesn't mean perfection, it means coherence, a feeling of being more or less in the right direction. And sometimes the simplest way to find alignment is to notice what drains you and what nourishes you. Some things drain you because they are difficult but meaningful, like exercise or honest conversation. Other things drain you because they are misaligned, like constant comparison, constant noise, constant pretending. Nourishment can be simple: a walk, a book, a small creative act, a moment of calm attention, a friendship where you can exhale. And these are not just lifestyle tips, they are philosophical clues. They point toward what your mind and heart are built to need. Now, there's a final idea to let settle in for this stretch of the night. The idea of gentleness as strength. Many traditions have noticed that gentleness is not weakness. It is control. It is steadiness. It is the ability to choose a softer response, even when a harsher one is available. A gentle mind can still be firm. A gentle person can still set boundaries. A gentle life can still be serious. But gentleness reduces unnecessary harm to others and to yourself. And perhaps, tonight, you can practice gentleness in the smallest possible way by letting yourself sleep, not earning it, not justifying it, not negotiating, just allowing it, breathing in and out. Let the shoulders drop a little more. Let the forehead smooth. Let the tongue rest in the mouth. And as the words continue, you can let them become less like ideas and more like a quiet current, carrying you without effort toward deeper and deeper rest. And while you rest, you can remember something simple. You do not have to carry the whole world on your shoulders. Even the philosophers, with all their questions, eventually had to eat and sleep and put their pens down. They had to let the mind release its grip, the way a hand relaxes after holding something for too long. So we can keep drifting, gently, into ideas that feel soft rather than sharp. One of the calmest themes in philosophy is friendship. Aristotle wrote that friendship isn't just a pleasant extra, it's part of flourishing. A good friend, in his view, is not only someone you have fun with, it's someone who helps you become more yourself, someone who reflects you back with honesty and care. There is something quietly healing about that, to be known without being handled, to be seen without being judged. Even if you're not thinking about any particular person tonight, the idea can warm the mind. Somewhere in the world, human beings build bonds. They share meals. They tell stories. They forgive small mistakes. They laugh in ways that soften the edges of life. And if your mind tries to tell you that you must do everything alone, you can let philosophy answer softly, no, we were never meant to do everything alone. Another gentle theme is gratitude, not as forced positivity, but as a way of noticing what is already here. Some philosophical traditions treat gratitude as a form of wisdom, because it corrects a common illusion, the illusion that the present is always lacking. The mind can be very good at scanning for what's missing, what could go wrong, what needs fixing. That scanning kept our ancestors alive. But gratitude is like turning your head and noticing the other half of the landscape, the part that is safe enough, the part that is already working, the part that is quietly supporting you, the bed, the roof, the breath, the small continuity of another day. You don't need to list these. You can simply feel the atmosphere of enough for a moment and let that atmosphere calm your nervous system. Now, we can drift to an idea about how we meet other people. The philosopher Martin Buber described two basic ways of relating. One he called I-it, where we treat something as an object, something to use, to manage, to categorize. And the other he called I-thou, where we meet a being as a presence, not a thing, but a someone. You can sense the difference immediately. Think of the way you speak to a customer service screen, compared to the way you speak to someone you love. One is functional, the other is alive. Buber's idea can be held gently as a reminder. When you meet someone with presence, something in you becomes present too. And this kind of meeting can be small, a real listening, a real thank you, a moment of eye contact that says, I see you. And even in your own inner life, you can practice I-thou with yourself. You can meet your own experience as something living, not just a problem to solve. You can say, quietly, here you are, I'm with you. Another thinker, Emmanuel Levinas, placed enormous ethical weight on the face of the other. Not just the physical face, but the reality of another person's vulnerability. For Levinas, ethics begins when you truly register that another being can be hurt, and that they matter. This isn't meant to burden you tonight. It's meant to soften the heart, to remind you that care is not an invented rule. It's a natural response to seeing clearly. And the gentlest part is this: you don't need to carry everyone's suffering, but you can cultivate a basic orientation of respect, a quiet refusal to dehumanize, a habit of remembering this is a person. That habit, practiced over time, makes your inner world calmer. Cruelty agitates the mind. Respect settles it. Now, we can drift back to questions of truth, but in a calm, practical way. One philosopher of science, Karl Popper, emphasized that good inquiry often involves the possibility of being wrong. A strong idea is one that can be tested, one that risks contact with reality. You don't have to turn this into a debate. You can keep it as a small mental hygiene practice. When you hold a belief, you can ask gently, what would change my mind? If the answer is nothing, then it may not be a belief at all. It may be a shield. But if you can imagine what would change your mind, your thinking stays breathable. You don't have to defend every idea as if it's your identity. You can revise without shame. You can learn without collapsing. And that learning can be quiet. It can look like a small correction, a small apology, a small willingness to say, I see it differently now. Now, let's touch on a very soothing moral idea: fairness. Some modern philosophers have asked how we might design a fair society if we didn't know where we would land within it: rich or poor, strong or weak, healthy or unwell, lucky or unlucky. The point of this thought experiment is not politics, it's empathy. It's the ability to imagine yourself in another position. And that ability, even in daily life, can soften your instincts. It can slow down quick judgments. It can encourage patience. Because when you remember how much of life is shaped by circumstance, you become less eager to punish and more interested in understanding. Understanding is calming. Judgment is noisy. Now, we can return to a quieter inner practice. Many philosophical traditions suggest that attention is the most important thing you own. You can lose money and regain it. You can lose objects and replace them. But attention is the substance of your life, moment by moment. Where your attention goes, your life goes. So, the simple practice is to guide attention gently, not like a tyrant, but like a kind hand on the shoulder. When attention runs toward worry, you can bring it back. When it runs toward replaying the past, you can bring it back. When it runs toward trying to control tomorrow, you can bring it back. Back to breath. Back to the weight of your body. Back to the safe, dim quiet of this room. And you don't have to do this perfectly. Each return is the practice. In a way, you can think of it as a very old philosophical skill, the art of returning to what is real, returning to what you can actually touch, returning to what is here, now, rather than what the mind invents. Now, as you continue to settle, it can be soothing to remember something else. Many of your thoughts are not instructions. They are weather. Some thoughts are like rain that passes. Some are like fog that lifts slowly. Some are like a gust of wind. You don't argue with the weather. You notice it, and you wait, and it changes. So, if a thought says, what if, you can let it drift by. If a thought says, you should have, you can let it drift by. If a thought says, you must, you can let it drift by. And you can return to the simplest truth of the moment. You are here. You are safe enough. You are allowed to rest, breathing in and out. And if it helps, you can imagine that each exhale is a small letting go of tension in the shoulders, a letting go of tightness in the face, a letting go of the day's unfinished edges, a letting go of the need to solve anything right now. And we'll keep moving slowly through these gentle rooms of thought until the ideas become distant and only the quiet remains.